The Shape of Returning, Chapter 1. The message arrived at 2:13 in the morning. No greeting, no signature. I was in Trieste last month. I stood outside your old apartment for an hour before I remembered you never lived there with me. He read it 3 times in the dark. Then, once aloud, hearing age in his own voice for the first time. Beside him, his wife turned in her sleep and placed one hand against the empty warmth he had already left behind. At 6:30, the city was blue with rain. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter in his socks, waiting for the coffee to finish dripping. The apartment smelled faintly of wet wool and burnt toast. Somewhere downstairs, a delivery truck kept reversing, the same mechanical cry repeating every 11 seconds. His phone lay face down beside the sink. He had not answered the message. Claire entered without speaking. She wore the gray robe she had owned for at least 15 years. The cuffs were beginning to fray. She poured herself coffee, added milk, then stopped midway through stirring. "You're awake early. I didn't sleep much." She nodded once. No concern in it, not indifference either. Just recognition. Marriage at their age was often the management of recurring weather. Is it the lecture? No. What then? He almost said her name immediately, perhaps because secrecy exhausted him now more than confession. But he realized with sudden clarity that he had no idea what naming the thing would obligate him to do afterward. So instead he said, "I got a message." At 2 in the morning? Yes. Claire sipped her coffee. And nothing. That usually means something. Rain tapped softly against the windows. She moved toward the table, sat down carefully, one hand briefly touching the small of her back before lowering herself into the chair. 63, he thought suddenly. We are 63. Not old exactly, but old enough that every emotional decision now carried structural consequences. Claire watched him over the rim of her cup. Who was it? There was. Not suspicion, not fear, just the question itself, laid gently between them like a clean instrument. He looked toward the window. Someone I used to know. Her expression did not change, which, after 32 years, frightened him more than anger would have. "I see," she said. But of course she did not. Not yet. By noon the rain had stopped. Daniel crossed the university courtyard beneath a low white sky while students moved around him in hurried clusters. Backpacks, earbuds, young faces carrying private catastrophes that would one day become anecdotes at dinner parties. He remembered being 30 and believing suffering conferred distinction. Age cured that. Inside the lecture hall, the heating was too high. His students were already waiting. Several looked tired. One girl in the front row had fallen asleep against her notebook before class had even begun. Daniel removed his coat slowly. "Good morning," he said. A murmur answered him. He taught literature badly whenever he was emotionally distracted, and he knew it within minutes. His thoughts kept breaking apart mid-sentence. Twice he lost his place entirely. At one point, while discussing exile and late poetry, he heard himself say, "The tragedy of aging is not that memory fades, it's that memory becomes physically persuasive. The body begins to confuse recollection with return." Silence followed. A few students wrote the sentence down. Daniel stared at them, suddenly ashamed. "Anyway," he said quietly, "that's enough philosophy for one morning." A few laughed politely. After class, the sleeping girl approached him while the others filtered out. "I liked what you said." "Which part?" "The thing about memory." She hesitated. "My father died last year. Sometimes I still expect him to call me after work. Not emotionally. I mean literally. Like my body hasn't understood yet." Daniel held her gaze for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like that." She smiled sadly and left. He remained alone in the lecture hall long after everyone was gone. Then he took out his phone again. Still no second message. For reasons he did not entirely understand, that disappointed him. He first met Elena Moreau in October of 1989 in a borrowed apartment that smelled of cigarettes and oranges. There had been too many people there. Painters, translators, journalists, one terrible pianist. The windows fogged from heat and conversation. Someone was reading Neruda badly in the corner. Daniel had been 36 then, recently married, recently published, already carrying the quiet panic that success sometimes arrives before character does. He remembered none of the conversations from that evening, only her voice, not the words themselves. The cadence, calm, deep for a woman, slightly amused, even when serious. At some point, he turned and saw her standing near the bookshelf in a black dress with one sleeve slipping from her shoulder. Not beautiful in the conventional sense, more dangerous than that. She looked like someone entirely unwilling to explain herself. Later, much later, he would tell her this. She would laugh and say, "That's because I had already spent too much of my life explaining myself to men." Back then, though, she merely asked him for a cigarette. "I don't smoke," he said. "You look like you do." I'm not sure that's flattering. It wasn't intended to be. And that was how it began. Not with confession, not with desire. Recognition first, then resistance. At 4 in the afternoon, Claire called him. "Will you be home for dinner?" "Yes." "Around 7, I think so." A pause. Then, "Daniel?" "Yes." "Whoever sent the message. Are they in trouble?" The question startled him. "No. Why?" "You have your rescue voice." He closed his eyes briefly. "I didn't know I had one." "You do." Another silence stretched between them. In the background, he could hear dishes, cabinet doors, ordinary domestic sounds continuing faithfully around a dangerous conversation. Finally, Claire said, "I'm not asking for details. I know, but don't lie to me if this becomes something." He leaned against the wall outside his office. The corridor smelled faintly of dust and radiator heat. "It isn't something," he said. Claire did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice had softened almost unbearably. "That sentence worries me more than it should." The second message came at 5:41. No reply. Sensible of you. Then, a minute later, "I almost didn't write at all." Daniel stared at the screen. His hands had begun trembling slightly, not dramatically, just enough to anger him. He typed 3 different responses and erased all of them. Finally, "Why now?" The typing indicator appeared almost immediately. "Because last month I saw a woman in a hotel lobby reading your first novel. I stood there watching her for 10 minutes. You were young in that book. Arrogant, sentimental, cruel and very elegant sentences. And I realized something unfortunate. I remembered you before life corrected you." He laughed aloud before he could stop himself. A student passing nearby glanced at him in surprise. Daniel turned away toward the window. Outside, evening was gathering slowly over the river. He typed, "That book was terrible." "No," she wrote back. "It was honest." He sat down carefully. After a moment, "Are you in Paris?" "Yes, for long." Another pause, long enough to make this a mistake. Something tightened painfully in his chest then, not excitement exactly. Recognition, the body remembering an old language before the mind could forbid it. Claire made sea bass for dinner. They ate with the radio on low between them. A program about restoration work at a cathedral outside Rouen, crumbling stone, water damage, invisible fractures inside supporting walls. Daniel listened too attentively to it. Claire noticed, "You're somewhere else tonight?" "Yes, at least you admit it." "I'm trying." She set down her fork. "Are you unhappy?" The directness of the question moved through him slowly. "No." "Then what is this?" He looked at her across the table. How many evenings had they sat exactly like this? Thousands, perhaps. The accumulated architecture of ordinary devotion. Claire had been beautiful once in the immediate way young women are beautiful, but age had revealed something steadier in her face. Intelligence without performance. Kindness stripped of vanity. He loved her. That was the terrible part. "I don't know yet," he admitted. She nodded faintly, as though some private expectation had just been confirmed. Then she said something he would remember for the rest of his life. "Be careful with nostalgia, Daniel. It's a seduction that survives long after desire dies." That night, he did not go immediately to bed. Instead, he sat alone in the living room with the lights off. Rain returned around midnight, soft against the windows. At 12:17, another message appeared. "Do you remember the winter in Trieste when the heating failed?" Of course he remembered. They had not yet become lovers then. That was the unbearable sweetness of it. They were still pretending restraint mattered. He remembered her standing beside the apartment radiator in gloves and a wool coat, reading manuscripts aloud while her breath clouded faintly in the room. He remembered wanting her with a violence so complete it had briefly made him ashamed of being married. He remembered not touching her for 3 more months. He typed, "Yes." This time, her answer took longer. "I found the cafe near the harbor." The old one where you said you first understood loneliness? He closed his eyes. It was all still alive between them. Entire cities preserved intact inside two aging bodies. Finally, another message arrived. I should not have written you. And then, before he could answer, but I think I may be dying. Daniel stared at the words. The apartment around him became unnaturally quiet. From the bedroom down the hall came the soft sound of Claire turning in her sleep. He read the message again. Then once more, not dramatic, not pleading, simply placed before him, a fact, or a weapon, or both. At 12:31 in the morning, after nearly 23 years of silence, Daniel finally typed the words he had spent half his life refusing to say. Where are you?